A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
An update today on what has become the legendary work of Australian surgeon Dr. Andrew Browning. You might recall he told his story in the book called A Doctor in Africa. Well, Andrew Browning works in maternal health care for some of the most impoverished and disadvantaged women in Africa. He's recognised as a world expert in obstetric fistula surgery, operating on women with a debilitating condition resulting from obstructed childbirth. Well, Dr. Andrew Browning first connected with the legendary late Dr. Catherine Hamlin over 25 years ago, and since then he's been establishing maternity hospitals with his own charity, the Barbara May Foundation. Dr. Andrew Browning AM is an Australian-trained obstetrician, gynaecologist and senior fistula surgeon. Andrew Browning, a special welcome back to 2020.
Hey, thanks very much, Neil.
Andrew, you're about to return to Africa. Before we get into some of the things that you're involved there, I wonder whether a quick update for listeners who don't know what fistula surgery is. Give us an in a nutshell description.
Fistula is more or less unheard of here, the fistulas we try and deal with in Africa. A fistula just means a hole, and the hole or fistula that we're dealing with occurs in women with a long, difficult childbirth. So about 1 in 5 women anywhere, 1 in 20 women anywhere in the world, when they're in labour to have their baby, the baby gets stuck. The baby's too big for the mother, or the mother's too small for the baby. So here you'll have caesarean, but many women in the world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, can't get access to hospitals, and if they need a caesarean, they can't get one. So they can stay in labour for 5, 7, sometimes even 10 days. If they survive, the baby usually doesn't, and they'll deliver a stillborn child. And when they regain consciousness, because they're usually unconscious by the time, they find that they're leaking uncontrollably from their bladder. Because the baby's being pressed against the bones of the pelvis, the tissues of the birth canal and bladder, and sometimes the bowel and the birth canal, all die, and they come away, and they're left with a fistula, or a big hole, sometimes 10 centimetres in diameter, to the bladder, from the bladder to the outside world, and sometimes to the bowel and the outside world. So they leak, they're ostracised, smell, they're ashamed, they're ostracised. It's a very miserable life living with this condition.
So women with fistula conditions in Africa, if it's not treated, they literally are a social outcast. But when you turn up with the unique form of surgery you do, it literally does transform the life of a woman because she can get on with things almost normally. Is that the case?
Most of the time, yes. And it's not just me. I'm not the only one doing this. When I first started to do this sort of work with Dr. Hamlin back in the 90s in Ethiopia, there was 9 fistula surgeons in Africa. That was it. But now there's over 400. So there's many, many people doing this now. And my role is to go over and just train surgeons all around Africa in the more advanced fistula surgery. So there's many, but it does transform their lives, you're right. And from being an outcast, being alone, ostracised, to someone who can regain their position in society again. It's not all the time. Some ladies you can't cure, but the vast majority you can, and it's absolutely delightful work to be involved with.
And over that 25 years, I mean, there weren't too many hospitals in some of the poorest places you were visiting, but these days when you go to Africa, your work is getting busier and busier because you're visiting a lot of centres. How many hospitals and clinics have you got operating around Africa now?
With the Barbara May Foundation, it sounds like you're talking about a lot, but we've built 4 hospitals, and I've partnered with, I can't remember how many, to establish fistula centres all around Africa and even in Southeast Asia. In September, I'll be in Nepal, where we've helped establish a hospital there, and I go and train the doctors there once a year. So it's improved a great deal. But the more important work is that we prevent fistulas from happening by building maternity hospitals and providing good, safe obstetric care for women in labour, so they don't risk dying in labour or getting a fistula. So last year in our networks, we provided 15,000 women with a free, safe delivery, which is really God's blessing, and not a single fistula occurred amongst those 15,000 women. And many, many women who would have died if the hospitals weren't there were saved, and likewise with their babies.
Andrew, 4 hospitals in Africa, and you were inspecting some new building works on your last visit there, and an Australian company that's made a donation to help that hospital get set up. That's one at Te Quoro. Whereabouts is that?
Yeah, that's we've actually got 2 hospitals on the drawing boards now. One's still on the drawing board, another one is halfway up. It's about chest high now, which is great. And so that's in northern Uganda. We've partnered with an organisation called Te Quoro. There's a foundation in Australia called Te Quoro Australia, which is partnered with an organisation in northern Uganda called Te Quoro Uganda. And we're very grateful that Sonic Healthcare Foundation is providing the funds through the Barbara May Foundation to do this. And so that'll be the only maternity centre with a 100-something kilometre radius from that area where many women are dying in labour and getting fistulas. So we're delighted to be able to partner with Te Quoro and Sonic to start building that hospital.
Andrew, give us a little insight into your workday. When you're on the job, you're operating, you're a fistula surgeon, you're in one of these African hospitals, and they probably don't look exactly like the sort of hospitals we might be used to here in Australia. But what does your workday look like? Because I understand it, you start early and end late.
I just got back from Africa 3 weeks ago, and I'm going back tomorrow. And every day is different. I usually start the day maybe 6 and often in the ward by 6:30 or 7, sometimes a little bit later. And then in the operating theatre, 8:30, and I'll operate on sometimes 4, sometimes 11 fistulas and patients in one day. And then ward rounds in the evening and teaching or meetings in the evening, and sometimes you're on call for obstetrics at night, so you're awake in the night to do emergency cesareans and things. And so, that's an ordinary day. Then you do that about 6 days a week, and then Sunday church in the morning, and then off to travel to the next country to start a week somewhere else to do it again.
No doubt it gets easier, and it must be very rewarding.
As you get older, it gets harder.
It gets harder. Well, let's talk about reward, because no doubt every time you hear of a good recovery, that's a wonderful reward. There must be some sadness in there too, because not everyone pulls through.
Not everyone falls through, but the vast majority do. And you don't do it for any reward. You do it because you love God, and you love because God first loved us. And He strengthens you to be able to do this work, and to be able to serve God in such a way is an enormous privilege and a delight, although it's not without its difficulties. But you meet some incredibly encouraging women. If I could just tell you one story of a patient I recently saw in South Sudan, just 3 weeks ago. Her name was Margaret, and she was actually married in South Sudan in a remote village at the age of 8. And by the age of 12, she was a widow. Her husband was caught up in the civil war, was killed. So at the age of 12, she was already a widow. She was remarried about 14, and then maybe 15, she was pregnant in labour, and was in labour in her village, in her little hut, mother-in-law's hut, for 4 days. Survived, but the baby died, and she got a fistula. And she was thrown out by her husband, thrown out by the mother-in-law because she smelled, she was ashamed, she was the object of a ridicule by everyone in her village. And that happened in 1971. So she's been living ostracised, looked after by her sister as best she can, isolated, the object of ridicule, no one sitting to speak with her since 1971. The last 4 years, she's been completely blind with cataracts, and so sitting alone in a hut in the darkness, smelling. Her nephew heard on the radio that we were coming to Juba to help women like that, so she brought her to Juba. And Margaret was so delighted to be in a room, sitting on a bed, and have other people sit with her that have been through the same condition, same situation, leaking urine and being ostracised, and to have other people sit with her and talk with her. She couldn't see them because she was blind, but she was so overjoyed. And, she was operated and had her first dry night for 53 years. And she told me, and I'll read out her quote for her. She said, "There is nothing hard in the hand of God. Everything is possible. We must have faith in God and pray." And that's a delightful thing about this work. I mean, you meet all sorts of people all around the world. And Margaret, she's illiterate, and she living in isolation, living a very difficult life of suffering for 53 years, but she knew God. And that gave her great comfort and joy. And that's the great hope for Christianity, isn't it? Anywhere, any point, anyone, any point in the world can know and understand the gospel message and come to have a full life in Jesus. And she was such an encouragement to the people around her. She went on to say, "I've suffered for a long time, but I never gave up. To those who are discouraged, I tell you, go to church and pray." And she was a great encouragement to God for all those people in the ward. I mean, she was suffering 53 years, not angry to God, but grateful to God. I walk away from this a little illiterate lady from living in silence and suffering for 53 years with great encouragement. That's a remarkable woman.
Andrew, nothing short of inspiring to hear that story. Also inspiring to know of your good work. And, you know, there are friends you've got supporting the good work you do in so many ways. What about the church in Australia? What about individual churches in communities? God's people. What can we do in response for the work that you're doing?
Oh, we're all part of the body, aren't we? I'm doing this as part of Christ's body, and we've had marvellous churches support us over the years. It was a church in Broken Hill who gave us the money to build our first hospital. Absolutely wonderful, along with another Christian brother in Sydney. Both of them gave us the money to build our first hospital. Remarkable. And many churches and my Christian brothers and sisters have been donating money through the Barbara May Foundation to help these women around Africa. Yeah, we're all part of God's body and all bringing about his kingdom.
There's a call to prayer, and there's also an encouragement to give to connect with Andrew Browning, Dr. Andrew Browning AM. And wish we had longer to talk today, Andrew, but perhaps next time on your visit home. But for listeners, they might be able to connect with you with a copy of your book, A Doctor in Africa. And not everyone has the privilege of having the preface of their book written by Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal Princess Anne. So keep your eye out for that book. You'll be able to buy that at online booksellers. To connect with Dr. Andrew Browning and perhaps to align with prayer and perhaps to be generous with a donation, the Barbara May Foundation website is this, barbaramayfoundation.com. Now, Barbara May Browning was your grandmother, Andrew, the matriarch of your family. And so your charity, your website, barbaramayfoundation.com. Andrew Browning, thank you so much for taking some time to share these thoughts with listeners today, and all the best as you return to Africa.
Thanks very much, Dylan. Thanks for your prayers.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.